The GR20. That is the name of a hiking trail, notorious for being the toughest long-distance trail in Europe. Some even call it extreme. And what is even more surprising is that it is located on an island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. The island of Corsica is the home to a prominent mountain range with many alpine characteristics, from the pine forests to the green meadows to the steep jagged peaks. The GR20, or as the locals call it, GR20, means Great Hike number 20 and is 180 kilometers long, running almost the entire length of the island from north to south. Starting at Calenzana at the foothills of the mountain, then climbing high up into the mountains and staying there for multiple days, going through a more challenging first half and then through a less steep second half, ending in the town of Conca near the southern shores of the island. And while most people hike the GR20 in July and August, I had some free time last October and spontaneously decided to embark on this adventure and try to walk and at times climb this strenuous hike. Hiking in October, I was lucky to experience less crowds and the beauty of the fall colors. However, there were some challenges that I had to face. All the huts that would normally provide food will be unmanned and some even be totally locked, so that meant that I had to carry all of my provisions. But also I had to be ready for the shorter days, colder weather and the strong winds high on the ridge before I could reach the other side of the island. But to quote the French dramatist Pierre Corneille, the greater the effort, the greater the glory. So let's start from the very beginning. Hopping on the train in Ajaccio, the views quickly changed from palm trees and beaches to tall mountains, and then again back to beaches by the city of Calvi on the other side of the island. From here I could see the mountains and I could only guess where the upcoming days would take me. Waiting on the bus stop to Calenzana, I was surprised that I was the only person heading into the village where the GR20 officially starts. And after a short ride, I made it to the Tighjettu, a place that in the summer months would be full with other hikers. But in this time of the year, I had my dinner alone in the quiet surroundings. Walking through the narrow streets of Calenzana, I then made it to the trailhead and began the first climb, carrying with me food that should last me for the first 5 days. The trail was passing through a burned area, moving further away from civilization, following the white and red trail markings. Coming to the first pass, a hiker going in the opposite direction generously shared with me some snacks, as well as information for what was ahead. Here I was now being introduced to the rocky terrain on the Corsica island. But soon I made it to the next pass, from where the trail was again more mellow. First refuge, right over there. Around noon I made it to the end of the first stage, but I only stopped here for lunch and continued with the next stage of the trail. Starting with a rocky climb through the birch tree forest, I met a German hiker that was heading in the same direction. These days started warm almost from sea level, But now at about 2000 meters, we had the first signs of the colder weather.
The final stairmaster.
Yep. Steep and spicy.
And very soon, we made it to the top of the ridge with a closer look to the jagged mountain peaks. Here we had to continue hiking along the rocky ridge, which included following the trail with occasional use of our hands, going up and down the rocks. And then finally, we were descending down the stony trail and made it to the Refuge, where another hiker was already starting a fire. Interestingly, even though there was no caretaker at the hut, because of the solar panels, there was electricity as well as gas to boil water for the dinner. Crossing down the wobbly suspension bridge, the trail then enters into a gorge with slick rocky slabs, where chains could be helpful in the case of wet or icy conditions. Gaining elevation in the rocky terrain, the beaches of Calvi could be seen away in the distance, and I continued following the trail markings with the occasional scramble. I enjoyed my snacks, surrounded by the peaks, and then continued traversing the ridge on the way to the next pass. Here I could see the hut down in the valley, as well as the ridge with the highest peaks on the island, where I was heading to later that day. But first I had to descend down into the valley. This hut was also unmanned, but it was still open, so I could charge my devices while eating lunch. Around 1:30, I started the second section for the day, which according to the guidebook is only 9 kilometers long, but it should take about 8 hours. While incredibly beautiful, ahead of me was one of the most challenging sections on the GR20. Here, the chains bolted in the rocks were of a much greater help. Stopping to appreciate the views and take a short break, there was still more climbing ahead. Up here and seeing snow can easily make you forget that you are on an island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. The snow patches were making it harder to see the trail markings.
Okay, there it is.
But also being frozen hard and icy, extra attention was required. Finally, I made it to the top of the ridge.
What a climb!
And the highest point on the GR20. traversing the ridge, I now had to descend down into the valley to get to the nearest hut. Soon after sunset, I met two ultra runners blazing through the GR20 in only 4 days. We continued along as I was trying to keep up with their fast pace. But having them ahead also made it much easier to follow the trail in the dark. And soon we arrived at the hut, where they only took a short break.
Good luck. Bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.
And I remained for the much needed rest. While this day was not supposed to have many challenging sections, that was my longest day, so I left the hut before the sunrise. Lower down the trail, I was entering into this valley filled with Corsican pine trees that can only be found on this island and characterized by their broad open crowns. Hiking uphill, the pine trees thinned out and the trail continued with a rocky climb. After reaching the pass, I continued traversing the slope, passing by the Refuge on the way to the next ridge. From here, the trail opened up with views to the west coast of Corsica, and then started descending down to the valley. Ahead, even though there were just a few birch trees, they were standing out with their bright vivid colors. Distracted by the lizards, I somehow managed to miss a trail junction and continued on a side trail following the pink markings. On this side trail, I could still get back on the GR20, I just had an additional climb and then a little bit of road walking ahead. Soon I made it to the place from where I got back on the main trail.
It's getting late, but the way to the next refuge should be quite more simple, so hopefully it doesn't get too dark again. Though it might.
In here, my feet and legs had a chance to take a break from walking on the hard rocky trail and instead could enjoy the softer soil on the ground. Higher up, while the clouds were rolling in, the ridge with the highest peaks on the island still remained visible. Up on the ridge, this tree illustrates well the strong winds that are passing through the island. The trail continued along the ridge near the clouds until reaching this broad pass and a flat grassy meadow. As the sun was setting and the moon was rising above the peaks, I still had about 2 more hours of walking until reaching my destination. Wow, night hiking alone is something new to me and I was nervous about it at first, Soon it brought a calm and enjoyable sense of stillness. And in no time, I reached Refuge Manganu and I joined a large group of hikers for dinner. While we all slept in the warm hut, during the night the temperatures had dropped and the water had turned to frost and ice.
Even the water source got frozen.
Ahead of me was a rocky climb to get to the higher ridge. With the occasional help of my hands, I kept following the red and white trail markings on the way to the narrow pass. Up near the ridge, the trail continued in its usual rocky and rugged characteristics. I packed my trekking poles in order to free up my hands for the extra support climbing down the rocks. On the GR20, one can easily develop a tough love for the trail. It can be rough and challenging, and at the same time be filled with spectacular views, making all the suffering worth it. After traversing the rocky face of the mountain, I made it to the next pass and continued with the descent to Petra Piana. I stopped to take a break and eat lunch before I continued to tackle the next stage. Here there was the option to follow the regular route towards the valley or to take an alternative, higher route along the ridge. The weather was calm, so I followed the double yellow markings on the high route. After the few rugged sections at the start, the trail here also had some easier sections.
Hello guys.
As the clouds were rolling in, the regular trail markings were helpful with following the route. And for the final descent, Mother Nature presented a brilliant spectacle with heart-shaped views through the clouds. And soon after that, I made it to the final destination for the day. On day 5, I had a shorter day ahead of me, as I only had to cover a single stage to get to the village of Vizzavona. The first half of the stage included hiking up towards the ridge, through a rocky trail, mixed with walking through bushes, and then again back to the stony and rocky section higher up. I then made it up to the ridge, which concluded the uphill part for the day. And now I had to continue down towards the valley, which in typical GR20 style included descending down the rocky trail, though without any scrambling or technical terrain.
I got slightly off trail, so a little bit of rock hopping and bushwhacking to get back on the trail somewhere over here. And back on the trail again.
As I was getting lower in the valley, I was welcomed by this colorful broadleaf forest.
Nice and cool here in the colorful shadow. But I'm surprised how can these trees grow in so many stones.
Passing by the river and seeing the water pools, as it has pretty much turned into a tradition for every hike, I had to jump into the water.
Woo! Woo! Feeling fresh after this.
Continuing down, the trail was entering into a denser forest with larger trees and thicker shadow. Then finally, following the flat gravel road, I made it to the village of Vizzavona.
Back in civilization.
Vizzavona marks the halfway point on the GR20, and this store was the only place along the trail where I could resupply with food for the remaining days on the trail. And although I didn't have a positive experience with the store owner, I managed to buy a good variety of food and ate dinner in the company of another GR20 hiker. After the shorter day yesterday, I continued to the second half of the trail, well rested and with supplies that should last me until the end. Vizzavona not only marks half of the trail, but it also divides it into a more challenging first half that was now in the past and a less technical second half. But as the caretaker from the very first night had told me, on the GR20 you have to be ready to use your hands for support every day on the hike. Coming out of the forest, there were nice open views to the mountains behind, and then the trail continued, passing through a variety of broadleaf and mixed forests. And soon I made it to the half point of the day, where everything was locked and this was the only inhabitant around. After lunch I continued traversing the forested slopes with occasional views to the surrounding mountains and a rare sighting of a few red kites circling above the head. I now had one final descent on the way to Bocca di Verdi. Here, just like at the previous hut, all the doors were locked and the windows were bolted with plywood.
Everything is locked. So I found this little shed here and it seems to be protected, and there was a broom over there, so I'm gonna try to clean it and set up camp here.
Even though I was carrying a shelter with me, having this shed would provide a solid weather protection and would speed up both my evening and morning routines. By going to bed early, I had plenty of time to sleep, and I still could wake up early. So I packed up and headed out before the sunrise, starting with a climb through the forest. As I was hiking up, the forest became less dense, and for the rest of the day, I was mostly going to stay above tree line. Reaching the pass, for the first time in a while, the nearby eastern shores seemed surprisingly close, reminding you that the trail will soon be over, but I still had a few days ahead of me, hiking south through the Corsican mountains. From here, the trail continues alternating back and forth between the east and the west slopes of the ridge. However, the forecast was for high winds from west, with the wind chill at near freezing temperatures. So for the first time, I had to use my jacket while hiking in the strong winds. But as soon as the trail crossed to the eastern slopes, shielded from the wind, it was warm again, and there was no need for the jacket. Back on the western slopes, I was again on the windy side, but by continually moving, I could stay warm. For a change of scenery, the trail passed through a forest, with the trees providing a good shelter from the wind. But in no time, I was again back up on the ridge, where the clouds were flying quickly through the air. Refuge was well protected from the wind for a lunch break, but I still had some more hiking ahead of me.
Pretty nice that now it's significantly less windy at the ridge in the afternoon.
The GR20 every so often can seem like an obstacle course out in the nature where extra attention is needed, which can be both a fun and a challenging part of the experience. But soon I was out of that obstacle course and I was heading down through the misty forest towards the final destination for that day. The mist in the air then turned into rain, and luckily one of the rooms here was left open so I could stay dry and be protected from the wind and the rain. By the next morning, it was no longer raining, and nearing the end of October, at 7 AM, it was still dark, so for the first half an hour, I had the headlamp on. The trail transitioned into a wide dirt road with impressive cloud formations in the morning light, and then turned back into a mellow path with a gradual climb towards the next pass. And here, a fellow visitor on the trail was on his own little journey. Salamanders can usually be seen after rain or in high humidity. Hiking near the ridgeline, the rugged mountains were far in the distance, and by reaching the pass, for the first time I could see the shoreline near the village of Conca, where the trail ends. This was the last point of the GR20 above 2000 meters, and I carried on towards the nearby hut. From here the trail descended toward the forest, traversing the slopes, following the red and white markings, with occasional views to the rocky pinnacles of Bavella. Here I also met a group of 3-feet hikers from the UK, and after we took a break, I joined them on the way to Bavella. As they were pretty fast, we made it to Bavella in no time, which had great views over the pinnacles, being absorbed by the towering clouds. We enjoyed a large dinner in the restaurant, but they were on a tight schedule and carried on while I stayed and enjoyed a comfortable bed. This was my last day, covering the final stage on the GR20. In this quiet morning, this fox was also out and on the lookout for breakfast. The trail drifted away from the asphalt road and entered into the pine forest. And after a short climb, made it to the nearby pass, overlooking the pinnacles and the Mediterranean Sea in the clouds. On this final stage of the trail, the terrain had quite different natural features, and as I was dropping in elevation, it was already getting warmer in the early hours of the day. With the warmer temperatures and low elevation, the plants and the trees were becoming more exotic, something that was only seen at the beginning of day one. There was a short stony climb, and then the trail entered into an area with large boulders and rocky formations. I had another short climb ahead of me, and oftentimes on this trail I was thinking, who could have thought of creating a trail through such a rugged terrain, yet it was well marked, making it both challenging and easy to follow. The trail continued traversing the slope, making its way through this crack in the rock, and then on towards the final descent towards the village of Conca.
Here is the village of Conca, where it ends.
The vegetation was getting greener, then the forest became denser, until finally I made it to the asphalt roads above the village. And as I was going down the village roads, all those memorable moments were flashing through my head. The high points, The night hiking, the strong winds, the autumn colors and the coastal views, bringing a sense of accomplishment from experiencing the rugged Corsica mountains. Until finally, I made it to the terminus of the GR20.
And done with the GR20, it's been a tough and a wonderful one. So, Jarvan, merci, au revoir. Thank you.